Alright, so this is lesson 7, the hook. So this I think it's gonna be a short lesson, but every single time I say that we end up with like a 1.5 hour long lesson. So we'll see how this goes, alright? Okay, let's look at a story, alright? This is the introduction to maybe a long novel, right? It's like 20 chapters, 30 chapters, right? And then the first chapter begins with I wake up. It's a bright Sunday afternoon. After lazing on the bed with my phone for a few minutes, I get up and go to a bathroom. In the mirror, I see myself, an average looking girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. I brush my teeth and get ready to hang out with my friends. Okay, what do you guys think? Is it great? Do you love this story? Do you feel engaged and ready to read the next 30 chapters of it? The wake up, go to the bathroom intro, bland, nothing's happening. Best story ever. You're probably gonna move on to the next story. So why do you guys say, like, why do you guys not like it? Right. It's run of the mill, it's cliche. Okay. Yeah. There's nothing grabbing your attention. The dark and stormy night. Yeah, nothing's happening. Alright, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. It's not exciting, it doesn't raise questions, there's no conflict. Okay, don't worry. Okay, so some of your points are correct. Like it kind of feels very bland, right? I do agree. But it doesn't mean that there needs to be conflict. Not everything needs to be conflict, right? You can have maybe some form of tension, but it doesn't have to be conflict. Um, yeah, but another reason why this feels very lazy is because a lot of authors, especially new authors, use this as a way to introduce the character. They'll be like, "Hi, my name is like Alice. I have blonde hair. I have blue eyes." And like, "Oh, but we are supposed to show don't tell, right? So I can't tell you I have blonde hair, but I can show you walking into the bathroom to see the blonde hair." Wow, that's great. And so a lot of stories start out with waking up and then going to the bathroom. A lot of like mediocre-ish stories, right? And it kind of gets bad, right? So what's wrong? Yeah, and so when you pick up a book, right, there's only so much time you have to make a good first impression, like the same way, like, oh, when you meet someone for the first time, the first 30 seconds will form first impressions that can last a lifetime, blah blah blah. That's kind of the way with a book. You have that few seconds that the person is reading, right, to get someone into like your book, right? So first impressions, right? And so this is where the hook comes in. Okay, so the hook is a literary technique in the opening of a story that basically hooks the reader's attention so they will keep on reading. So, it's I would say it's relatively self-explanatory, but I think it's still good to go through a definition. Okay? So, the hook, alright. How I define it is the first 1 to 2 sentences, if you can make it striking, right? Make it striking, right? Shock me, right? Okay, maybe not shock, right? Draw me in, give me something to latch onto, right? And then the following 2 to 3 paragraphs start to reel them in, right? You don't put something shocking and then nothing else happens, right? Okay. Any questions with this so far? Let's see. Tells me nothing. You wake up, you walk in the bathroom, explosion. Your life is a microwave. You remember from lesson 3, info dumps get really tiring, you lose them fast. Yeah. Shocks you, grab teaser. No. Wouldn't this be conflict? It doesn't have to be conflict. It can be tension, right? But tension doesn't have to be conflict. And likewise, there's conflict that is not tension, right? Imagine you have people like you have kids. Okay, I walk into the park. Kids are arguing about who threw the ball over the fence and who should be the one to take it, right? And then they're like, right? There's a conflict, but there's no tension, right? I'm not invested in the outcome, right? I don't care, right? But if I know the fence has barbed wires, and on the other side of the fence is a bloodthirsty dog, right? Oh, suddenly maybe there's tension, right? But tension and conflict are separate things. You can use conflict to create tension, but those are not necessarily the same thing. Could have the same introduction when you look in the mirror, it's not you. The hook for 1984 is a simple sentence. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah. Do I have it here? I might have it here. Did I put it in? No, I didn't put it in this. Yeah, but the hook for 1984. It was a bright day in April and the clocks were striking 13. Yeah, that's the interesting one. Okay, so let me move to the next one. Okay, so let's go through some types of hooks. Okay, we're just gonna go through some examples of like stuff that I picked up from books. Feel free to take inspiration, feel free to come up with more of your own. They don't fall into very nice categories, but just to give you an idea, right? Okay, shock the reader. All right, as I sit here with one foot on either side of the ledge, looking down from 12 stories above the streets of Boston, I can't help but think about suicide. Not my own. I like my life enough to want to see it through. I'm more focused on other people and how they ultimately come to the decision to just end their own lives. Do they ever regret it? In the moment after letting go and the second before they make impact. There has to be a little bit of remorse in that brief free fall. Do they look at the ground as it rushes towards them and think, well, crap, this was a bad idea? Somehow, I think not. It's something that just straight up shocks you. Thoughts? Yes, no, like, don't like. Do you feel like you want to read more of this book? Right. I think sometimes like writers go all too fast already. Where like some writers try to go too fast and it's like, oh, we need to introduce your name. We need to introduce like how you look like. That's not true. I mean, this book starts like that. It takes its time. Yeah. The first sentence already makes you think they're gonna end their life. The following paragraphs aren't as shocking, but it's still intriguing. Yeah. Definitely caught your attention and makes you wonder what's gonna happen next. It's catching, though you have to say it's a bit edgy. It ends with us is a romance story. It's about falling in love. And immediately after the like in this scene, like the very first scene, she actually meets the guy. Got many thoughts for before suicide. Basically, the following paragraph makes you wonder why do they think this way. Yeah, you see this kind of thing, right? Like there is no conflict, right? Oh, but the tension, you can feel the tension. Yeah. Okay. Let's try another one. Okay. So this one's tension, right? When I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold. My fingers stretch out, seeking Prim's warmth, but finding only the rough canvas cover of the mattress. She must have had bad dreams and climbed in with our mother. Of course she did. This is the day of the reaping. So Hunger Games. I still love the Hunger Games book. I think I have mentioned that countless times throughout the workshops. Um, but I really do enjoy the way Suzanne Collins goes through like the story. This is how the book starts. This is how like the entire series begins, right? Do you feel the tension? Does it raise questions, right? There's like, okay, do you guys feel? Let's start with that. Do you guys feel the tension? Yes or no? And if yes, why do you feel it? Day of Reaping sounds ominous, like a very deadly day. Yeah, see. So it raises questions, right? Where's another source of tension that you're feeling? Tension, probably not, but it raises questions. What's the reaping and why did Prim have bad dreams about it? Another source of tension is someone missing from the bed. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm getting at. Um, like, you know, when I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold, right? Prim's supposed to be there, but she's not, right? And that already feels unsatisfying to a certain extent, right? It's the same way like a married couple, like, oh, the husband wakes up and finds the other side of the bed empty, finds the other side of the bed cold. Maybe she left in the middle of the night. Maybe she passed away like 3 years ago, and till today he's never gotten over her. Right? There's like, I feel like cold, empty beds can create some level of tension that you know, it's kind of relatable. Yeah. It's waking up but not finding someone they expected. Yeah. As if they were whisked away. A lot of questions. Who's Prim? Where they gone? And the hook they hook you really hard with the end at the reaping. Yeah. So that's kind of how you want to raise questions, right? Imagine if she, after like, oh, this is the day of the reaping. By the way, reaping is when this happens. Every year this will happen, and then the capital will need people to blah blah blah. Like, okay, careful, don't do info dumps. Give the reader just enough to latch onto, hook them in, reel them in, keep them like wanting more. Right? If you answer everything, they're just like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. All right, time to put down the book, go to sleep. Right? Don't give them the chance. Don't explain. Let them read. Yeah. Any comments about this one? The implication of not finding someone in your bed on the day of the reaping already infers enough. Oh, that's not what has happened, but don't worry. You feel like you overuse leaving something unexplained in the intro. Are there other approaches? I mean, you can kind of like, we're going through some hooks that you can consider using. Uh, I think it's okay to leave things half explained, right, and let the reader figure out through context, right? I mean, if you want something that requires zero explanation, right? Fan fiction tends to be a thing. Why? Because there's absolutely no exposition required, right? You already know the characters, you already know the universe, you already know like what the canonical lore, and then you just have to make things happen, right? But if you are in a book, right, you are you're starting fresh, right? There's a universe that you have not explored. So if you want zero questions, you have to make it modern day. But modern day what? Modern day New York is very different from modern day Thailand, right? All the right. So how are you gonna make sure if you want to leave stuff unanswered, right? You're gonna have to explain everything, and that's gonna be an info dump. So I think you need to be careful with that. I think it's okay. You don't have to explain all the characters. You don't have to explain everything about the protagonist. You don't have to explain the entire universe from the get-go. So let the reader figure it out. I don't think leaving information missing is a bad thing. Yeah. Fundamental to a hook. That's not true. Hooks can be things that are missing. Hooks can be tension. Hooks can be shocking. It doesn't have to be missing information, right? Um, yeah. Like for instance, in this one, right? There's no missing information, right? You know, streets of Boston. Okay, sure, right? Is it day or night? Okay, fine. But we don't really care, right? We just know that she's just thinking about stuff, and you want to read more, right? I guess to a certain extent stuff is unexplained, like why is she thinking this way, but at the same time, again, it's fine, you don't have to explain everything. Yeah. Okay. um let's go on to the next one then. Intriguing perspective, right? It was a pleasure to burn. It was a it was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blacken and change. With the brass nozzle in his fist and this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor, playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the ethers and charcoal ruins of history. You love that intro, so classic. Welcome to Fahrenheit 451. The book itself was okay. Not super huge fan of how the author did some stuff, but overall it's okay. So many flowery words, but still very effective. Yeah. The intro is so effective. Flowery but through your taste. Yeah, I think sometimes like you're like, oh, let's not do flowery. Flowery can work, right? I think the flowery language, right? Like the excessive descriptions, it paints a picture, right? Like it doesn't feel like, oh, let's describe everything and anything, right? There is like, great python spitting its venomous kerosene. Like you picture a very solid imagery, and that's what makes it so powerful. Yeah, and I think like by indulging you in this, right, you get a feeling of what the protagonist is feeling with the pleasure to burn, right? Because it's talking about pleasure, right? It's talking about you enjoy, right? I can't just say he enjoys it with a smile on his face, right? That doesn't go far enough, right? You want to see things blacken, changed, a great python spitting its venomous kerosene like an amazing conductor playing all the symphonies. See, this is how the author chooses to say pleasure, right? And this is what makes it so, like, damn. And I think it's interesting, right? Because this is not something most people agree with. Like, I can see where the protagonist is coming from, right? But I don't share the same perspective as you, right? So, like, this is where the intriguing perspective comes into play, right? You think this is interesting because you may not necessarily agree with it, but like you would like to see where this goes, right? And I think that is very fun. Like, oh, feels so good. It's presented as a, oh, of course, matter of fact statement. It's pleasure. Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, it's like it feels so strong, right? Like you point out, right? Like it's almost like a matter of fact, right? And then maybe someone else would say, oh, I like to burn things, but oh, don't get me wrong, I don't like to burn things that I'm not supposed to. I only burn things when it's supposed to be got, we need to get rid of it, right? Like rubbish or trash. Yeah, don't worry about it, I'm not a pyromaniac, right? This guy has, like, this protagonist, right? There is no qualms. If you want to imagine him as a pyromaniac, right? Like the author says, go right on ahead. Just enjoy, indulge, burn. Right? Oh my goodness, it feels so good. Right? I feel like the hook, right? It it's like the part of the story where you have such a fresh state, right? Whether you have a clean slate, you have not given the reader anything, right? You don't, like, if you have a whole, like, by the end of the story you throw in some weird twist ending, the reader might be like, oh, what's this, doesn't make sense, bad writing, right? But when you're at the start, you have such a fresh, like, fresh page, literally the first page to begin, right? And you can put down anything you want and the reader will not question you. They will question the main character, they will question what's going on, but they won't question you. Oh, it's so good. So a person thinks it's okay, but the other person thinks it's not. Well, I mean, that's for you to, like, that's for the reader to feel, right? They can look at it, they're like, I don't agree with this main character, but sure. Okay, let's try another one. Raise questions. I know I'm not an ordinary 10-year-old kid. I mean, sure, I do ordinary things. I eat ice cream, I ride my bike, I play ball, I have an Xbox. Stuff like that makes me ordinary, I guess. And I feel ordinary inside. But I know ordinary kids don't make other ordinary kids run away screaming in playgrounds. I know ordinary kids don't get stared at wherever they go. Ooh, what's going on, right? So, is this a good hook? Do you like it? Don't like it? And if you like it, if you want to read more, why? the question in my mind is, what's this fixation on being ordinary and you want to know more? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously like the main question that it's directed at is just um like what makes this main character, what makes this protagonist not ordinary. You kind of like it. It makes you wonder why this kid scares the other away from just looks. Do they have a tail? Because that would be cool. Yeah. I don't know. It could be their appearances, their physical appearances. It could be a reputation thing. Maybe all the other parents are like, yo, if you when you're in school, if you see this kid, don't talk to him, right? That could be a reason, right? And I think this kind of things raises questions. And I think when you raise questions, that's a that's a good way to draw the reader in with what's going on. Yeah. I think it's important to understand, like, okay, so I think Chad earlier asked about like leaving something unexplained. I think this is something you want to be cautious of, because there is a difference between questions that are intentionally raised by the author, right? So here, obviously, on like why is the kid not ordinary, right? And that's the question that the author intentionally raises, right? But there are examples where people write and then they just leave something unexplained, and then and it's not the good kind of questions. It's just like, wait, why is this person doing this? It doesn't feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, and then the reader feels confused, right? Oh, sorry, why did he? What's wrong? Did the author make a mistake writing this part? Right? Did he leave one extra part in? Did he get physics wrong? Because ice doesn't melt into steams. Right? Something is wrong here, I think. Right? Sometimes those kind of questions are not the kind you want to raise. Right? But if it's an intentional directed leaving things unexplained, I think that's good. Whereas if you go down, so what's a wolf takey? Like, I don't know what's a wolf takey. Like, okay, I hope they explain it later. But otherwise, for now, when I'm reading, I'm confused. Right? Then it feels weird. Right? So sometimes you might wanna, like, for instance here, right? This is the day of the reaping. So now you know, it feels like this question is gonna be answered later, right? But if it's just like, oh, I wake up, I brush my teeth, and then after that I pick up the wolf takey and go in and put it into the bag, right? And then I prepare to go out with my friends. What the heck is the wolf takey? So I think these kind of questions is something you need to be careful of. Yeah, let's see. If we're going to the wording, it feels like it takes place in a small town or city. Yeah, the wording's a bit bland for a hook, but you don't dislike it. Bland wording can work in a certain setting. I think it's fine. It does play into account. Like, you do have to take into account right now, because see, the protagonist is presented as a 10-year-old kid, right? If a 10-year-old kid begins talking to you with the whole idea of like, oh yes, um perhaps you do not see me as ordinary, and maybe that is a question too sophisticated for you to understand. But if you were to see the way I interact with my fellow peers in the playground, you would you wouldn't question it, right? This is not how kids talk, right? And so it feels simple, and maybe because it's supposed to be simple, it's because it's a 10-year-old kid that's talking to you, right? Yeah, okay. This challenges what readers think is the norm for things. Like, 10-year-olds aren't meant to be feared. Burning things aren't inherently thought to be pleasurable. Yeah, it leads the reader to immerse themselves in the story. Yeah. You forgot the scope of vocabulary applies to first person point of view. Yeah. That too. Please keep that in mind. Agree it's not supposed to be it's supposed to be simple, and maybe you're not interested in a book that sounds like a 10-year-old. I took this off you know what, let me actually I took this off like a list of good hooks also. Mm. So I haven't actually read this book before. Let me take a look. What's this book about? This book is Oh, this book is a children's novel genre, so it is meant for children, I think. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, but sometimes you do have like books meant for adults, but written by kids, or like written with a simple minded. Like, I mean, let's take Flowers from Algernon. If you read that before, you should know the protagonist is not the most sophisticated person when he talks. Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Is that what it's called? Incident of the Dog. Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. That's also another story from a 15-year-old boy. And that 15-year-old boy is also on the spectrum somewhere. And who I that book is not meant for kids. I don't think I don't think it's a mystery novel apparently, but I don't think it's kids. I don't think it's for kids. Right. So I think there are ways to get you into the story where even though like it feels like a very simple minded protagonist. Flowers at the Fun Home. Oh yeah. Dr. Strauss says I should write down what I think and remember everything that happens to me from now on. Yeah. It's amazing. No, oh my goodness. Flowers for Algernon and the Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I recommend reading those if you like to look into perspective. Yeah. But again, those are very good books. Classics. Alright, let's try another one, alright? Strong emotions. Okay, so using strong emotions to hook. February 6, 1993. To my dearest parents, grandparents, and brother, I am going to ask the hardest and very last thing from you all. I do not want you to forgive me. What I have done is not excusable, and above all else, I knew better than to do what I did. I have not been wise, and I'm asking you all, please forget you ever had a daughter, granddaughter, or sister. I know that this will come as a shock. I am so very sorry for the shame I have brought on you all. I needed to come home with my pride, and this seemed the easiest and quickest way to do it. I have not been well for months and have been so terribly homesick. I love you all, and God, I do miss you. But please never mention my name again. Try to do as I say and act as though you never knew me and throw away any photographs of me away. I cannot do 5, 10, or 20 years like this. You produced a wonderful human being who wanted to change the world, but has instead messed it up. I am so very, very sorry. Sandra. I, I believe this was an autobiography. Is it? Let me take a look. I read this before quite a long time ago. I forgot like the full context. Let's see. Blah blah blah. I think it is an autobiography. Okay, but in the meantime, what do you guys think of this so far? What kind of book? Oh, it is an autobiography? Yeah, okay. She wrote a book about her experiences. Very intriguing setup due to the amount of guilt it conveys by disowning herself. Forgot what was treasured for years. This is a real story, by the way. Oh my goodness. Um, you don't gel well with the sentence structure and word choice. Oh, okay. Why not? What's wrong with the sentence structure and word choices to you? What did she do that was horrific enough for her to ask her entire family to forget her completely? Oh boy. Wait till you read the book. Yeah, I won't spoil it. If you wanna take a look, you should go take a look, right? If any of these hooks draw you in, right, come and explore the story. That's the point of the hook. Right? I'm not gonna ruin the hook for you. You have to come and read. Okay, the vibe you get is the kind of vibe you get with literature because it feels like a slog to read because it doesn't sound natural. Okay, I see. Can kind of get the vibe. Yeah. I think this is interesting because I don't know how much of it is like revised or if this was the very original letter that she actually sent her family. Right. And so I think it's interesting, especially when you have like you're dealing with like these mixed layers of how much of it is exaggerated or fiction or cleaned up versus what it actually was, right? Does it feel real? Does it feel raw? Does it feel too polished? Right? Yeah, you think it helps that it's a letter. The formality feels more reasonable with that setup. It's very formal, but we know it's in the words of the character, not the author. Well, in this case, the character is the author if it's since it's an biography, right? Like, it's interesting to think about. Yeah. All right, let's try another one. Louvre Museum. How do you spell it? How do you pronounce it? Louvre. I pronounce it Louvre, but I might be wrong. Louvre Museum, Paris. 10:46 p.m. Louvre. What really? Louvre. Uh, okay. Renowned curator Jacques. I should have read this. Staggered through the vaulted archway of the museum's grand gallery. He lunged for the nearest painting he could see, a Caravaggio. Grabbing the gilded frame, the 76-year-old man heaved the masterpiece towards himself until it tore from the wall and the painting collapsed backwards in a heap beneath the canvas. As he had anticipated, a thundering iron gate fell nearby, barricading the entrance to the suite. The par- the path. Oh my goodness! I should have looked up the pronunciation. Shoot. Far off, an alarm began to ring. The curator lay for a moment, gasping for breath, taking stock. I am still alive. He crawled out from under the canvas and scanned the cavernous space for someplace to hide. A voice spoke, chillingly close. Do not move. The Da Vinci Code. So, yes. What do you guys think? Interesting, not interesting? Love it, hate it? Me as a character is not the same as me as an author. Yeah, it does. It does. You have specific thoughts about Da Vinci Code. Oh man, I know it's tied up in all sorts of like, especially the Christianity drama and whatnot. Interesting and definitely set in France by the sprinkling of French word. I mean, it's the museum. It's like literally the pyramid museum. Interesting from an action perspective, but there's a lot of words in there that you don't understand. By oh wait, sorry. This one. But basically, by context, this is the man. This is the curator. This is the painting, right? This is a like the same way. Oh yeah, this is the I don't know. Like this is probably the painter's name, right? I think by context you can kind of infer. Yeah, then the rest are just words, I guess. Yeah, it is a bit complex and like difficult words will slow the reader down, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind the next time you say, oh, let's pull out a thesaurus to find like the most complex word I can put in here. Why is the curator tearing a painting off the wall? How is the voice so close? Yeah, you will find out. I mean, the movie pretty much starts off this way too. It's like it's the hook of the movie, right? Yes, action is a kind of a good way to get people into like a story. Okay, let's like try. Okay, someone else was saying something. Okay, we'll wait for everyone to type first. The Discord will just show me people are typing. It shows a series of action that can cause tension. Yes. Action tends to be so if you okay, so this is something to take note, but basically the idea is that you want to capture the essence. So the hook, right, is not just like I'm just gonna write something, right? The hook should eventually lead to should tell the reader what vibe it is, right? If it's a romance story, right, I'm not expecting an action scene for the hook, right? Because that might tell the reader that, oh, it's an action story, and if you don't like action, you shouldn't read this, right? Because sometimes it does give the impression, right? If it's a romance story, right, the story could start off with like, I'm not someone who deserves love, right? But can you imagine like a epic hero story, like I don't know, like Lord of the Rings, starting with I'm not someone who deserves love, right? That's not a good hook for an epic hero's journey, right? Like like for instance, if we look at the It Ends With Us, right? This is it's if you were to guess, right? If I don't tell you what genre of book this is, what kind of genre would you guess? Right? Drama? Okay. Any other guesses? You think it's like murder mystery? Is it like action? Is it superheroes? Teen melodrama. Okay. Murder mystery, not that. Analysis of a culture. Yeah. See, it tells, to a certain extent, it will paint a picture of what vibes to expect throughout the story, right? Um, and these kind of things are like you might action scenes to start off with works well if it's gonna be action, if it's gonna be thriller, right? But if it turns out this is how you start the story and it turns out it's just romance, then you would probably chase away the people who wanted a romance story because they'll read the first part and like, okay, yeah, this is not romance. I'm putting this book down. I thought this was romance. It's not. Right? Why is that action? And then they put the book down. Right? Then the people who like action and thrillers, they will read the book, they think this is good, and then they get to the middle part and it's like, where's the action? Why am I getting romance? And they will also put the book down. Right? So your hook should ideally kind of hint to the reader what to expect in the later books in the later chapters, but it's not necessary. But be careful that your hook might chase away the wrong people. The hook is like a sampler platter of the story. Yes and no, it doesn't have to be, right? Like for instance, where's the Hunger Games, right? Hunger Games, okay, it does hint towards, like, if you know what the reaping is, the reaping is a central core of the Hunger Games. So to a certain extent, it does, yes, right? Likewise, in Fahrenheit 451, right? I think that's the temperature that books burn at, right? And he's burning the books, right? It's a core concept to the story, yes, right? But not all of these are like core to the story. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but if you can kind of at least hint to the reader that this is the genre to expect, right? You won't be chasing away the wrong people, right? Because if it's a romance story and it starts off with action, you will scare away the romance fans, and then the poor action and thriller fans will be halfway through the book wondering when's the action going to start, right? Yeah. Sometimes books do face this issue also. Like they try to do something shocking and that drags you in. Yes, it's interesting, but then it's kind of like, yeah, turns out that's not the genre of the book. Uh, just make sure your story feels in line with what's about. Yeah, to a certain extent. If you mention a gun, you should let it go. A bit of that. Yes. But just something to keep in mind, alright? You don't have to overdo it, and a hook doesn't have to be like 100% related. Just something to keep in mind. Yeah. Let's try another one. Water, earth, fire, air. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days, a time of peace when the Avatar kept balance between water tribes, Earth Kingdom, Fire Nation, and air nomads. But all that changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar mastered all four elements. Only he could stop the ruthless firebenders. But when the world needed him the most, he vanished. 100 years have passed and the Fire Nation is nearing victory in the war. 2 years ago, my father and the men of my tribe journeyed to the Earth Kingdom to help fight against the Fire Nation, leaving me and my brother to look after our tribe. Some people believe that the Avatar was never reborn into the air nomads and that the cycle is broken. But I haven't lost hope. I still believe that somehow the Avatar will return to save the world. Something you actually know, something you wanted to mention it before. What do you guys think? Is this great? Does it make you want to keep watching? I think it's an interesting start. It's a large info dump, but it explains a ton and can hook you in by setting expectations. It's a classic, never loved it, that's fine. It's quite concise. Works better as a monologue? Yeah. It raised questions about the world. Yeah. I think this is interesting, right? Like, if you are looking, remember, genre. If you are looking for fantasy hero's journey, right, and you like magic elements, right, this is for you. This introduction just straight up tells you this is what you're gonna get. You are gonna get a hero's journey. You are going to get magic elements. You are going to get warring between the nations, right? And the fact that it mentions tribe means you're not gonna get some like futuristic stuff. It's probably a bit more olden kind of fantasy, right? And that's what some people like, right? And by presenting that to you straight up, here's what to expect from the rest of the series, right? It can draw you in. You forgot what did the movie version do with this, because there's probably a good contrast. Wall of Text, really? Oh dear, I have not watched the movie. I heard it was quite bad. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I don't think this is the. I took this from like one of the wiki, but I don't think this is a. I think the later on, like this was the very first intro. I think the later on will change. It'll change to like. I believe that somehow. I believe that Aang will save the world. Right. I think later on it changed. Just changed into that. But I think this is the early on introductions before you actually know too much about the world, and I think it's interesting. Yeah, it depends on your goal as a writer and what your audience is. Yeah, definitely. Right. I think part of what to consider is also that this is a firstly, this is a kids show, right? It's targeted for a younger audience. That's one. Number two, variants of this will be repeatedly played at the start of every episode in this show, right? Which means that this has to be relatable throughout the entire story, right? Which is why they're not doing an action straight up. Okay, this is what happened, right? But like in fact, it kind of is because it does show you it just show Katara finding Aang for the first time and like snippets here and there. So it kind of does play a bit of like a story, but it's mostly like narration. It's mostly like info dumping. But I think it works well enough considering that it's so concise, and I think when it's read to you, it's more smooth going than if you were to actually read it yourself. So I don't think it's that bad. Yeah, but I think this works well for what it is. This is a good world building hook, but you've grown to kind of dislike it because of how often you heard it. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. But I think it works well for what it is. Again, it's a children's book and this has a children's show and it has to be repeated at the start of every episode. Yeah. In one of the stories you're working on, you use the term half rise sun to indicate the time of an important meeting is to be held, just to give world building. Yeah, it's to set expectation that technology is very basic, but you don't want to set out more than that. Yeah. I do have a story that it's a book that I have shelved, but the introduction also has a pretty strong hook with a bit of world building. Yes. Okay, let's try one more, alright? I didn't have that many, but this will be the last one. Start at the crucial point in the story. I think we went through this in one of the previous lessons. I think it wasn't part of the previous lesson, but I brought it forward to just talk about it. It was supposed to be part of this. Right? Will you take a look at that? Pretty pathetic, huh? Well, you'll never believe this, but that llama you're looking at was once a human being, and not just any human being. That guy was an emperor, a rich, powerful ball of charisma. Oh yeah. This is his story. Well, actually, my story. That's right. I'm that llama. The name's Cusco. Emperor Cusco. Yeah, so this you thinking about this a couple of minutes ago, we did go over this in the last lesson. Yep. It starts at the crucial point in the story as a flashback, right? Or like flashback, I don't know. You flash forward, right? You see the middle part of the story, and then they come back to the front and say, "This is how we got there." Um, this is also another form of hook, right? You can either start at the crucial point in the story and continue on, or you can start in the middle and then move back and then move forward. Like honestly, sometimes just take the most powerful point of the story, start there, tell you this is what it accumulates into, right? Let's find out what happens. Let's find out how we get there. In fact, you see that in a lot of comedy or like those those shows like those sitcoms kind of thing, right? Like something's happening, then they record scratches. Well, you might be wondering how I got into this situation. Let me start from the beginning, right? So sometimes like that is basically like the sitcom form of starting at the crucial point. You start at somewhere that's interesting. You say, this is what's gonna happen later down the line, and it's gonna answer all your questions. Stay with me because the part leading up to it might not be interesting, but this is what we're gonna get to. Right. There's another form of hook you can do. Yeah. You were thinking of this kind of hook. Yeah. I think it's cute. What about the rest? What do you guys think? I see people typing. You know the context, then you start from the beginning on how and why. Yeah, kind of. I think sometimes like because the parts leading up to it might not be interesting, so you have in some sense is cheating a bit and saying, you know what, work with me on this. All right, the first parts are not gonna be interesting, but it's gonna get interesting later. Okay, please, I'm gonna give you a bit of a taster. Please stay with me. Yeah, sets the very comedic tone, indicates that it will be referential humor by using the James Bond reference. To a certain extent, yeah, and he's also full of himself. Yes, that ties in with the unreliable narrator kind of thing, right? You kind of like it as a hook, but sometimes you worry that this spoils the story as well. It sets you up to know things lead to that. Oh, and you hate this being used as a hook on YouTube videos. Yes. Um, yes and no. Um, Spoilers are overrated in your opinion. The interesting thing is the journey. It's quite interesting. It's leading in the question. It's not really a spoiler if you're trying to get people on hooked on how you get there rather than what will happen next. Yeah, so this is something interesting. Have you guys watched the Titanic? I think I referred to the Titanic before, right? In the movie Titanic, right? They find like a ship finds like the wreckage. They dive into the wreckage and then they find pieces of like history and they say, hey, this we one of the survivors might be able to talk about this, right? And so you meet Rose, the survivor, and then she talks about how she talks about her whole love story, right? And as she talks about the love story, right, like you already, it takes out the suspense because throughout the story, right, most of the people you're just asking, will they survive, right? But that's not the point of the story. The point is not whether or not Rose survives, right? And so they tell you she's gonna survive. All right, relax. In fact, she's alive to tell the tale, right? So the really the it's okay that they spot that for you because then the tension won't come from the wrong place. Because in the end, the Titanic is a story about love. It's not a story about survival, right? And so they tell you straight up, look, she's gonna survive. All right, she's gonna be fine, right? Let's hear the love story and let that be the source of the tension, not whether or not she survives. This works. This also happens in stories where kids gather around the fireplace. Let me tell you a story, right? Because it's always in the form of I survived whatever happens in the story, right? And so by taking out that element of fear, right, you can you can help the reader focus on the right parts of it. And I think that's okay, right? It doesn't mean that you spoiled it and there's no more tension. That's not true. For an extreme example, right, there is a book, it's a comic horror novel that is titled John Dies at the End. It's straight, the title itself just says John dies at the end. That's it. That's like you can go make of it what you will. I don't actually know if it's false because I've never watched it, but I think it does. Does he die? I don't actually know. Let me guess who dies at the end. I don't know. Sometimes like it's okay to spoil it, right? It depends on the vibe you're going for. Are you going for comedy? You know, sometimes stories are about okay. Um, How I Met Your Mother, right? You already know the ending, right? That is not like okay, maybe not quite. They do leave some stuff hidden, but like in the romance, right? They're straight up telling you, I do meet your mother in the end. You do fall in love, right? So yes, throughout the story you might find the main like oh yeah, there'll be heartbreak, but in the end something will work out right. Right? That is literally spoiling kind of the ending for you. Right? The journey is what matters how you get from point A to point B. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to think about. Don't just like write it off just because it's falling for you, it's overrated, right? I think it works. The fact that the mother its name isn't mentioned, yeah, it's the focus of the tension. Who is the mother? Yeah, so that's kind of the part you have to figure out, I guess. Yeah, I think it's cool though. Like play around with it. Sometimes you don't know if something works well for your story until you try, right? Okay. So now that we've gone through some hooks, any questions? Okay. Um. Okay, if no questions, let's move on to the last part. I want to tie in one last thing together. All right. We did talk about the inciting incident. Remember the 3-act structure and we say the inciting incident. Right. How does this. What do you guys think about it now that you understand the hook? Do you think they're related? Do you think they're the same thing? Right. What do you think is the relationship? Or what do you if you think they're different, what are the differences? If you think they are the same, right, then how does it tie in together? The inciting incident pulls us further into the story. in the case of the bells and whistles of the hook, but it seems more integral to the story and plot. We feel like the hook can serve as the introduction to the inciting incident. Hook, then someone else says, hook is the initial setup, the first few sentences, and set up expectation. Inciting incident is what takes the premise and makes things change. Hook is for the reader's benefit, the inciting incidents for the plot's benefit. That's interesting to think about. I think that kind of works. Yeah, but okay, so basically the hook and inciting incident are separate things. They have very different functions, right? Inciting incident is part of the plot, but the hook is basically what draws the reader in. The hook itself doesn't have to be the inciting incident, right? So, example, it's a murder mystery, right? The inciting incident could be the point where the detective walks into a room and finds the dead body, or someone bursts into the detective's office to say, "You need to help me," right? But the hook could be a man walks on the street in the middle of the night, right? He he has a package on him, right? And then he holds it close to his chest. He looks around. He feels like he's being followed. He walks quickly, right? Quickly. Then he realizes he hears footsteps behind him. He walks faster. The footsteps walk faster. Pop, 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 pop. He gets chased. He runs down an alley. It's a dead end. Bam! You hear a scream. Boom! Right? Cuts to day. And then the policemen are looking at the dead body. Right? That's the hook. The inciting incident doesn't involve the protagonist, right? So basically, inciting incident, okay, so again the definition is the unexpected event that in the story that upsets the character's status quo, usually the protagonist. So it begins the story's movement in a positive or negative way that culminates in the climax, right? So again, it's here, right? So inciting incident must relate to the protagonist. Why is the protagonist doing these things, right? Because if the protagonist doesn't give a shit, right, he can just go home by the end of the day. Not my problem. The end, right? See, where is the hook, right? Like in the murder mystery that I mentioned, right? No, what's happening to the character that eventually gets killed? We don't care, right? We just know, got it. There is a murderer going about. That is the hook, and maybe the murderer kills in a special way, and that's why it's interesting, right? But that's not the inciting incident, right? So the inciting incident needs to relate to the protagonist, needs to upset the status quo and push the protagonist past the point of no return, right? They cannot just like, okay, I'm done, end of the day, all right, I'm just gonna go home, I don't care, forget about it. Right? Sets the story up for the climax and suits the genre of the story. Yes. And then basically pitfalls is the opposite, right? The story does not relate to the protagonist, right? If the inciting incident happens on another planet where the main character doesn't give a shit, we don't care. But suddenly it turns out that his very important shipment that he's waiting from that country or from that planet, interplanetary travel, right? That planet suddenly cannot send him the item because of like the invasion. Oh, now it's personal, right? Suddenly the protagonist is involved, right? I think this is kind of interesting because sometimes like if you look at certain movies or stuff like that, maybe it's like, I don't know, superhero, right? They don't care about what's going on in another place, right? But then the moment that something happens that makes it personal, right? Like, oh, I wouldn't have cared, but you fucked around with someone I know or someone I love, and now it's personal, right? Okay, the incident should not be easily reversed. If the incident can be something that I look at it, sometimes you're watching dramas and then like it just feels like the whole time they could have just like listen, right? Sometimes it's like someone like, oh honey, look, I can explain. It's like, no, you've exhausted your last chance, right? It sometimes feels like, just let me explain. I have a perfectly reasonable explanation for this. And then the protagonist explains. And then the other person's just like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. The end. Right? It didn't have to turn into the drama that it was. right? Oh, those feel very not super and like not super satisfying when it does end, right? If the incident is resolved early in the story, that's not your story, right? Like sometimes what people do is like they'll have it, they think this is the incident, and then like it gets solved, and then like then for the rest of the story, what do, right? If it gets solved early, right, that might not be your inciting incident. The thing that comes all the way to the end, right, that's the incident. Yeah. And if the incident is not engaging, no one cares, then I think you have lost the reader. So you need to make something that people can feel for. Like you don't have to care like directly, but you need to be able to see how like it relates to the main character. How give me a reason to keep reading. Okay. Any questions? Okay, yeah. Tony Stark didn't care that he was selling weapons until he found out the bad guys were getting them and using it against him. Exactly. That's what I like, that's exactly what I'm getting at. Um Sometimes like people like honestly it doesn't matter. In fact, I think Lord of the Rings, right? At the start, right, the introduction to Lord of the Rings is something something, some battle, something happens, right? But like the protagonist doesn't care, doesn't affect him, right? The point of no return is when he eventually goes on the mission, right? And then as he goes further out, right, it becomes too late to turn back. Right. That's kind of like, that's when it becomes relatable, right? Yeah. So you see how like the hook and like the inciting incident are kind of different things? Yeah. So just keep that in mind when you write the hook. You can kind of make it the same thing, but there is a distinction. So make sure when you include one, you don't leave out the other. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. One last part, alright. How do we fix the first story? Right. Come. Throw out your creative ideas. How can we make this something you would want to read? You don't know, you just grab the whole thing. Okay, tell you what, one of the easiest way, it's a bright Sunday afternoon, sure, I wake up, I go to the bathroom. In the mirror, I see myself, an average looking raptor with green scales and red eyes. Fumbling with the toothbrush, bracket raptor hands are not the most dexterous. I I make a half-ass attempt to brush my teeth before I get ready to hang out with my friends. How does that work? Do you feel like reading it now? Brush my fangs, thank you very much. You can fix it, alright? These are fixable problems. Yeah. You can make the main character hate themselves. Same old day, same old look. Yeah, sure. That definitely raises questions, right? You could make her oversleep when she was supposed to meet someone important. Yeah, definitely. This is the start of the last normal day of my life. After bracket incident, like nothing would be the same. Yeah, that works. Yeah. So I think you guys have some good ideas, right? If you feel like stories are not interesting, right? Sometimes it ties into the hook, right? You need the hook to bring you like into, yeah, it just brings you something. Drag me into the story, right? Don't give the reader a chance to put it down. Give them like make them an offer they cannot refuse. Well, so any questions? Add some momentum probably. the joke is the start, phone blank away notifications, tangled blonde hair, hot mess. Yeah. Without knowing what else is gonna happen, it's hard to fix. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you imagine the rest of the story, right? What kind of story do you think it's gonna be? And how can you play around with that, right? Why don't if she's gonna meet someone important, why don't we just cut straight to the point that she's gonna meet someone important? She's outside the restaurant, she takes a deep breath. Okay, this is it. I enter. Right. Go straight to that, right? Don't do the whole morning routine, right? Or maybe if it's a different scenario, right? I wake up, I unstrap myself off, I unstrap myself from the bed and kick off, right? I float over into the washroom where I take a tube of toothpaste, squeeze it into my mouth, and start like using my tongue to push it across my teeth, right? Then that's something interesting, right? Because you have taken what's ordinary, like what's a morning routine, and turned it into a space team setting, and that's gonna be interesting in itself, right? Make something weird utterly normal. Yeah. Terrible mental image, but very intriguing, right? This is the kind of things you can do. Make it interesting. That's the whole point, right? You're not here to write boring stories. You want to write stuff that people want to read. Yeah. All right. Okay, let's move on to the homework. All right. So simple. You'll just be writing hooks. Okay, this is like relatively short. Okay. We have a few sections. I'll just ask for 3 hooks. Change it up. All right. Don't just write the same kind of like type of hook. Try to give me different genres of hooks in different forms. Right. Different combinations. Try something you haven't tried before. Mix something that I would like to read, right? Heck, make something that you would like to read, right? You write down hooks, right? The moment you read it, you say this needs to be a book, right? Make a hook so good you can't say no to writing the rest of the story. All right, so that's your goal. That's your homework. Any questions? Intentionally write boring stories to fight the status quo. It has to be tastefully done. It has to feel intentional, right? Because sometimes people write unintentionally boring stories and it's boring. If you can make it intentionally boring, it could work, right? I mean, again, if you want to go back to this, right, thing, I wake up with no problems whatsoever. As expected, it's a bright Sunday afternoon, given that yesterday was Saturday night. I laze on my ordinary bed with with non-suspicious bed sheets, using my phone and surfing websites that you don't need to know about because it's what you expect. Ugh. Right. Like, I don't like it probably could do more polish. I'm at living, right? But I think if you could make something like that work, right? You try to make it boring but like suspiciously boring. Ugh, that's gonna be good as well. Right. Okay. Any questions about the homework though before I digress? What do you guys think? Easy, doable, excited? I just like, oh, I don't want to write the hook. Look, if you're not interested in writing the hook, if people are not interested in reading, it's really clear and interesting. All right, go for it. I hope you guys have ideas already in your head for what you can explore. When in doubt, look to books, right? You can Google for good hooks out there. Look at what existing books are doing. Heck, look at what movies are doing, right? Look at what like TV shows are doing. Look at what comics are doing, because all these things rely on the same human psychology, right? People are gonna pick up a piece of media, ask themselves, would I like to read? Because every book, every comic, right, web comic, every TV show, drama, right, is a commitment, right? And the hook is basically telling you, yo, okay, the rest of the story will be interesting. Trust me on this, right? This is worth your time. And so if you can kind of capture this concept, right? Capture the essence, right? You can go quite far with your story. Yeah. Yeah, let's see. You've been thinking of the past exercises as trying to write hook, so you're at home with this one. Okay, that's very good. All right. If we have no other questions, I'll let you off for the rest of the weekends. Uh, please do enjoy yourselves. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Again, I appreciate you guys uh spending like your precious weekends with me. Yeah. And I will leave you guys to it then. Good night, good night. Yeah, no problem, you guys. Bye bye.